Okay, I is for influence. Don't fear it. And this is a very big deal. This is probably the most important tip in here because this advice alone, over time, would actually take care of all the other stuff. And that is, you have to read poetry. Okay, you cannot write poetry without reading poetry. If you are under the impression that you write poems, but you've never read any by someone besides yourself, then what you're writing is not poetry. Okay. People, especially young people, often resist this idea because to them, I guess they hear it as an order from an authority figure about writing properly, as if there are rules about what you have to do in order for it to count as a poem in the eyes of the powers that be, or whatever. And that by not listening to that, they're being, cool rebels or something. And that's not it at all. It's about love. It's just about love. You never meet an aspiring actor who says that they don't watch movies. You never meet someone who's in a band but says that he never listens to music, and yet you meet all of these people who claim to write poetry, and you ask them, who they read, who their favorite poets are, and they say, often quite proudly, that they don't read anyone, because they're so original or whatever. And this, aside from being kind of obnoxious, is also puzzling. I mean, if you don't read poetry, that must mean you don't like poetry. And if you don't like poetry, then why are you trying to write it? I think that this comes from the fact that most of us associate poetry with school. We think of it as something we learn about in school, in English class, whereas, movies or music are things that we seek out on our own in our free time because we like them. And that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that in our culture, currently, we don't, encounter poetry just by cultural osmosis, the way that we do pop songs or movies. If I ask you how many movies you've seen, or how many songs you've heard, there's no way you could even begin to list them all. It'd be thousands and thousands and thousands. And yet, if you ask someone on the street, to name a poem, one poem, it might take them a while, or they might not be able to do it at all. And if they can, it's probably a poem that they were forced to read in school, rather than necessarily one that they like. They might not even have a favorite poem, the way they have a favorite song or a favorite movie. Everyone has those things. And so we think of poetry as a school thing. And now that's sad, but it's not poetry's fault. It's the culture's fault, and you have to remember not to judge poets and poetry based on, whether you liked your high school English teacher, just as you wouldn't reject music based on whether you liked your music teacher. You need to have favorite poets and favorite poems. Now, you don't need to like all poetry. That's a common misconception, this idea that there are, poetry people who like all poetry, who like every poem in the whole world, and then there are other people who are not poetry people and they like no poetry. And that's messed up. It should be, that everyone has some poems and some poets that they like, and others that they don't, just like everyone has some bands that they like and others that they don't, or some movies that they like and others that they don't. I'm a professional poet, and I don't like all poetry. There are poets I don't like. There are famous poets that I don't like. Just as there are some poets I do like that my other poet friends make fun of me for liking. Same as anything else. If you read a poem and you don't like it, that doesn't mean you don't like poetry. It just means that you didn't like that poem. So keep looking until you find poems that you do like, and think about, what those did that the others didn't, that spoke to you. I mean, if there is a famous poet that you don't like at first, you should probably, give him or her a fair chance, because maybe you'll end up liking them eventually, and it just takes a little work. But if you do put in the work and you end up not liking that poet, then that's okay too. So find the poets you do like, and don't be afraid of doing that, because just because you like them, that doesn't mean that you have to copy them, or that you automatically will. Just the same way that if you like Nirvana, it doesn't necessarily mean that your band is going to have to try and sound exactly like Nirvana. You can be informed by your love for the artists who came before you without sort of automatically being brainwashed into copying them. So don't be afraid that that's going to happen, because it won't. The more you read, the better you're going to get. O is for original word pairings, originality of phrasing, especially with adjective-noun pairs. You always want the phrases that appear in your poem to sound like something that the reader's never heard before. So avoid things that everyone hears a million times a day. So when you catch yourself saying something like the green grass or the tall building, catch that. Switch it up. Do more with it. Say the secretive grass or the cake-like building or something. One of the duties of poetry is to wake up language. Because 99% of the time, as we go through our daily routine, language is sort of asleep. And that's why, you can walk up to the bank teller and she can say, "Nice weather today," and you can say, "I'm fine, thanks." And neither of you even notices, because you both just know that you're going to walk up there and she's going to say some words and you're going to say some words back. Because that's the custom. You could be saying ba and moo, it doesn't matter. You don't even have to be using real words necessarily. That's how little words matter in a day-to-day interaction like that. Now the difference between that and poetry is like the difference between mindlessly eating a whole bag of chips in front of the TV and eating a fine meal prepared by a world-class chef. The phrases you select are ingredients, and careful thought has to go into each one, or should. You need to give people something that they haven't heard before. Because then it's something that you're saying. If it's something that everyone's heard a million times, then you're not saying something, you're just repeating something. And why would people need you to do that? If they've heard it before, why do they need to hear it again from you? It may seem special, to you because you're the one writing it, but it won't to the reader because they've heard it before. This comes back to the first point about learning to think of the poem as something that you're doing for other people. All these tips are closely related to one another in that way. Okay, T, our second T, our final T, is for title it last. Title goes on last. Now this seems like a small thing, but it's actually a big thing. Do not, ever, put down a title before you write the poem. Why? Well, because you don't know what the poem's going to be about yet. And how can you title a poem before you know what it's about? You may think you know what it's going to be about, but what if you're wrong? Well, what if it turns out that's not what the poem wants to do? You might be thinking, well, okay, it's my poem, it's going to be about whatever I say it's going to be about, how can I be wrong? You have to be willing to let the poem surprise you. You don't title it first because you need to be willing to let the poem go somewhere else if it turns out that this is what it wants to do. This is what the poet John Keats meant by his theory of negative capability. So, are you in charge of the poem or is the poem in charge of you? Well, both. Think of it as like walking your dog. Okay, you're the human, you're holding the leash, so you can decide exactly where you're going to walk, but should you? Well, no, you have to let the dog show you where it wants to go, so to speak. If you're too rigid, if you decide beforehand, well, we are going to walk exactly this way, and you don't respond to the dog's pulling, to the dog's suggestions at all, well, anyone who's ever walked a dog knows that your dog's never going to go to the bathroom that way, which is your goal. So, titling a poem first, putting the title on first, is like deciding before the walk that, I have declared that my dog is going to go to the bathroom on that tree over there. But if you've ever walked a dog, you know that that's not how it works. Just like I didn't expect to use an analogy about getting your dog to go to the bathroom in this video, but it turned out to be the perfect thing. You need to be willing to let your poem surprise you, to go where it needs to go. If it didn't surprise you, it's not going to surprise anyone else. And if it doesn't surprise anyone else, then it's probably not a very good poem. So poetry controls your actions, but it also obeys your commands, as the saying goes. Okay, so that was my beginner level instructional video about how to avoid common mistakes that people who are new to poetry often make. So, if you're new to poetry and you're looking to, do it right, or at least not do it wrong, then just remember the mnemonic device T.S. Eliot. T, therapy, the poem is not. S, secrets, don't keep them. E, experience, doesn't matter. L, lines, they are a thing, break them properly. I, influence, don't be afraid of it. O, originality of phrasing. And the second T, title it last. Okay, thanks for watching. If people find this video helpful, I'd love to post more in the future. Let me know down there in the comments. If you have specific concerns or questions about poetry, I'd love to address those too. You can go ahead and contact me through my website, chrisocook.com. Thanks once again for watching. Happy poeticizing, and may negative capability be with you.